Growing crime and a worsening economic situation are fueling new protests in Haiti.
This week, thousands took to the streets in Port-au-Prince and other major cities demanding the Prime Minister Ariel Henry step down. In recent weeks, Haitians have struggled to find fuel, leaving some unable to work. Others lack access to proper food and water due to a rise in inflation. The problems of kidnappings and gang violence have also surged in recent months. With us now is Macollvie Neel. She's executive editor at the Haitian Times. Thanks for being with us today. Just kind of give us the broad overview of the economic situation in Haiti and specifically what's causing this fuel shortage.
Sure. Thanks for having me on. It's great to be with you. I think what we need to remember when we see these protests out of Haiti is that they're not new. For the past year or so, certainly ever since the assassination of the president last July, we've seen more and more of these protests. The fuel piece is one indication we see consistently, but what happens with these protests is that it might start out with, an outcry over the price of gas being $12 per gallon or $15 per gallon, but it ends up ultimately bringing together people from across different sectors who are unhappy with the way things are going, not just economically, but socially, politically, and definitely when it comes to the crime, because that is where folks have such difficulty getting up every morning to get to work safely is an issue. The idea of dealing with the economic hardship itself is even more exacerbated by the fact that people have to really think about their safety and how they're going to move about their day-to-day. So yes, prices are on the rise. It's not just the inflation. There's corruption specifically in Haiti that's really caused these prices to skyrocket for basic staples. But beyond that, we really see just a lot of anger, desperation, and outright fear from people in Haiti who are not sure if they're going to make it from day to day, because it's so common to be victims of the crimes that we see taking place all across the city of Port-au-Prince and the metropolitan areas, and certainly in other places in Haiti as well.
Yeah,
with the fuel specific,
sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say with the fuel shortage specifically, what we've reported at the Haitian Times is that, yes, there is inflation. We're all experiencing it worldwide. But one thing about the corruption I mentioned is that we see the motorcycle taxi drivers, people in the transportation sectors, accusing gas station owners of deliberately withholding the gas that there is available and selling it to different street level merchants to then sell on the black market, so-called the informal market, at higher prices. And then the profits are then shared with these gas station owners. It's an example of how something that might start out we're all dealing with gets exacerbated in Haiti, where there's no rule of law really and no one to come in and step in terms of a government to say you can't do this and take advantage of people in this way.
So people are calling for the Prime Minister to step down. You say there's no government to step in. What is he not doing?
So Prime Minister Ariel Henry, I'll remind your viewers, was appointed as Prime Minister just days before President Jovenel Moïse was assassinated. And so after the assassination, there was a question of legitimacy with him even being in that role. And there was a lot of back and forth between Henry's camp and the foreign minister at the time over who really should rule the country. Ultimately, Henry stepped in, and his mandate was to ostensibly go in, stabilize the country so that elections could be held to elect a new president. That hasn't happened. And so from the onset, people have been saying he's illegitimate, and it's just gotten much worse because in the years since the assassination, we've seen an earthquake that really made the scarcity of resources just get to levels we've never seen before. We've seen the rise of the gangs and the weapons proliferating in Haiti. The police are at their wits, they're at the end of their rope, essentially. What equipment or resources they didn't have has been delayed. Some who were able to fight different neighborhood gangs, so-called gangs, just weren't equipped enough to really do it. So we've seen a lot of killings and just turfs battles between the police and these gangs that have, again, victimized innocent people. So there's just a litany of ills that the government has not been able to respond to in any way. And part of that is because people feel like it doesn't have the legitimacy. And in terms of a political solution where different sectors in Haiti are trying to come together to build these elections, perhaps appoint an interim government, we haven't seen the support that those people would need from the international community to help with the transition of power. And so this vacuum that's been created.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you make a good point there when you acknowledge the international community also partly responsible for the instability in Haiti. You've also mentioned natural disasters and the internal desperation and corruption. But the Secretary General of the Organization of American States, that's Luis Almagro, slammed the international community for what he says are 20 years of, erratic political strategy. How much blame does the rest of the world shoulder for what's happening in Haiti now?
I mean, you saw it in the statement yourself. It was really remarkable to have such a statement come out and essentially acknowledge that the international community has not done right by Haiti. And so, yes, the group of people who've been in and out of Haiti, the UN, the US State Department, certainly the OAS, the core group, all of these people bear some responsibility because, yes, over decades, they've been systematically they've facilitated some of the Haitian politicians and governments' corruption that's gotten Haiti to this point, right? And so the statement, I think, from the OS was a good start, but I feel personally that it should really go even further and call for things like making sure we properly acknowledge and define what these gangs are in Haiti. They're not, they're beyond your so-called, street gangs. This is a criminalized state, essentially, that we're looking at. For all intents and purposes, when people can get up in the morning to go to work, we're looking at a failed state when you don't know where your next meal is going to come from and where, migration continues to take place because people don't really see a way out. And so the international community, I think, really needs to do more than just call and acknowledge that they were wrong. They need to now put in place the mechanisms that would trigger some sort of action to help Haitians primarily, firstly, respond to these gangs so that safety and security can be restored. And then I think at that point, people might feel comfortable with even going into elections and having conversations about long-term structural foundational issues that Haiti needs to deal with.
Well, Macollvie Neel, thank you so much for joining us and giving a sense of what's happening in Haiti right now. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. It's great to be here.